And I guess the reason I wanted to do this podcast episode is quite recently a popular podcaster and social media figure went online and said that walking is not a form of exercise. Now, this could not be further from the truth, both just rationally, but also from what the literature says. Welcome back to the Smart Strength Training Podcast. This is podcast episode 13, and we're talking today all about fitness outside of the gym, how to incorporate movement into your life. Because the issue with the modern world isn't that people aren't exercising in the gym enough, it's not that they're not working out hard enough, it's simply that people are just not moving enough, full stop. Now, this is obviously different from person to person, but it's estimated on average people spend anything between 6.5 and 9.5 hours per day sitting down. And this can be broken down into like between 3 to 4 hours between TV, 7 to 8 hours at work on computers, and then 2 to 3 hours on your phone scrolling. And now the fitness industry has long pushed this narrative that if you're time poor, you should be doing 15 minutes, high intensity intervals, circuits, like just do as much crazy work in 15 minutes as you can. And that's nonsense. You can't undo in 15 minutes what sitting down for 9 hours a day is doing to your body. But the other problem we have is you hear this sort of like, well, you've got to hit 10,000 steps per day. So 10,000 steps per day is about 5 miles. So that'll take you around an hour and 40 minutes roughly to accumulate constant walking throughout the day. That's setting the bar pretty high for a lot of people. And the problem when we do that is then it's like, oh, what's the point? I can't even get near that. So you just don't do anything at all. And just out of interest and curiosity, like the 10,000 steps, that's not backed by science at all. You may have heard before, it actually comes from a Japanese marketing campaign from the Tokyo Olympics back in 1965. They were trying to sell a pedometer. So actually, recent research, 2020, JAMA International Medicine found the mortality rates progressively improved before leveling off at and around 7,500 steps on average per day. And then going over 7,500 steps didn't actually seem to be that much more beneficial. But I think it's worthwhile pointing out that this lack of movement is really a modern issue. You think sort of pre-World War, people's jobs were just much more labor intensive. We were doing things that would just make us move a lot more day to day. And then post-World War II, with rapid urbanization, technological advances, people started to become more sedentary. Fast forward to the 90s or 70s to 90s with technology, computers coming out, and then more recently the internet. And of course, now life is trending to being much more sedentary. And I think you can maybe look at the parallels between the obesity epidemic, which came more pronounced around the 90s, early 2000s. I'm not stating that obesity is caused by lack of movement, but lack of movement definitely plays into the topic of obesity. Let's talk metabolism, because movement and metabolism is very much aligned, very much linked. And metabolism, as I've mentioned on this podcast before, the fitness industry loves that word because it's a really great way to trick people. Let's just go over what metabolism is. Your metabolism is the sum of all the energy used by your body for all the chemical reactions that occur day to day. I think of a better way or a better expression than just saying metabolism is to think of your total daily energy expenditure, or your TDEE, which is broken down into 4 main components. So the largest proportion of your metabolism is your resting metabolic rate, or your basal metabolic rate. And that is the energy used by all the organs, tissue, muscle, brain, just to preserve life at rest. So you lying in bed before you do anything, about 70% of the energy that your body uses per day is just used by your organs keeping you alive. So 70% of your total daily energy expenditure is from your resting metabolic rate. Then 10% of the energy that you use day to day comes from the thermic effect of feeding. It takes energy to break food down. And obviously, the more you eat, the more energy it will take. But it's estimated that around 10% of the energy your body uses day to day goes into that thermic effect of feeding. So that's 80% of the energy you use day to day is simply feeding and your resting metabolic rate, leaving 20% left over. Now, it's estimated that 15% of that last 20 comes from non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Neat. That is walking around. That is, if you're watching this on YouTube, my hands are moving. So it is all the movement that accumulates over the day just outside of exercise. That's 15%, leaving just 5% for physical activity. So going for a run and like your workouts. Now, I appreciate you get instant kickback that some people say they work out every day or they set counts really high and it's higher than that. I know that, that's fine, but this is just an average. So you get a rough idea to say that most people aren't working out every day. Most people aren't working out for that long if they are working out every day. So it's kind of naive to think that your exercise activity is actually going to weigh into the total daily energy expenditure across a calendar year, thinking about the periods of time you're off from exercise and that kind of thing. So we just don't burn that much energy from bouts of training. So focusing on your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis, is very, very smart. And it's smart because it accumulates over the course of the day. Whereas the challenge sometimes with this 10,000 steps is it's quite a hard benchmark. But actually, if you just think of energy accumulating as you move over the day, then all of a sudden, if you've got a lunch break and you've just got 5 minutes before you need to get on a call, it is worth going for that 5-minute walk on the block. It might not seem like much in that moment in time, but if you do that every day, then that accumulates over the course of the day and over the course of the week. And that's where the kind of key to non-exercise activity thermogenesis is. And the fitness industry does a really good job at pushing like hard workouts, smashing your workouts. And that's really not a massive part really of metabolism and metabolic rate. And of course, as a strength and conditioning coach, I have bias. I do want people to engage in strength training and cardio overall. But the most important thing is that people just find a way to getting active, which is why I also think when it comes to picking activities, you pick activities that you like, that you're more likely to stick to. Because as much as I would like more people to be exercising and doing cardio, we are clearly not winning this battle when it comes to getting people more active. So just getting people engaged in activity first, that has to be the most important thing. And I guess the reason I wanted to do this podcast episode is quite recently a popular podcaster and social media figure went online and said that walking is not a form of exercise. Now, this could not be further from the truth, both just rationally, but also from what the literature says. We want to encourage as many people to move as much as possible, and walking has such a low barrier to entry. It's free. Most of us can do it. And we also know from observational research, looking at athletes all year round, looking at their overall activity, athletes that are more active outside of their sport, so they don't have to drive long distances to get to training, or they're not on computers outside of training, seem to have more favorable body compositions all year round than those that are more sedentary. Now, that's not proof, but it is just a suggestion that even for active people, how active you are, or highly active people with exercise, how active you are outside of a sport still does seem to be quite important. So we now know, it's hopefully quite well recognized, that we need to be more active. But let's talk about how to do this, because lots of people face very real barriers when it comes to trying to move more. And the challenge with this is that a lot of people face very different barriers. So this is definitely not all going to be applicable to every single person. But let's go through some of the kind of like headline things around staying active. So first up is just finding some way of active transportation. This could be something like just parking further away from your office front door, so you're walking a bit further. It could be cycling to work, it could be cycling to the train station or walking to the train station rather than driving. I appreciate that is not going to be a year-round thing that you can stick to, but it is still worth thinking about. Going back to the idea that it accumulates. So if you can just get into the habit of trying to do it 2-3 times a week, that is still really smart. Next is taking movement breaks whilst in the workplace. It's obviously really common for us to have lunch breaks, but it'd be really smart to try and get in a little bit of movement as well. So finishing your tea, coffee, and then going for a 5-minute walk, 10-minute walk, whatever you can to try and get more activity in. It's very easy to be sat at your desk, but let's be really honest, how often are you sat at your desk pondering things, looking things up on the internet? So it could be a really good use of time just to get out and get a little bit more active. Next is to just do simple things like incorporating movement into household chores. I know that's not the most exciting thing in the world, but if you are noticing that you're very, very inactive from day to day, then just getting active in those chores could be just a very simple way to kind of kill 2 birds with one stone. And then active socializing has become really, really popular. Things like cycling, paddle, those sorts of things. People are moving away from going to the pub and are generally more engaged in yoga holidays, fitness retreats, that kind of thing. Really great way to try and incorporate activity while seeing your friends, just so you're covering as many bases as possible when it comes to activity, because it's super common to focus on what you can't do. And I understand that. It can feel like it's just such a huge challenge. But if we can flip that mindset and focus on what can you do, even if it seems small, even if it's just 5 minutes. And again, this like, accumulation of movement is smart. And that's why sometimes it's nice to have something like fitness tech. In the past, I've spoken about fitness tech and I've been very quick to dismiss it because it's not accurate. Certainly things like calories or calorie expenditure on those sorts of devices aren't accurate. And I'm not going to sit here and say that the step count's super accurate, but it's certainly accurate as a percentage of what you are doing. So if you are doing very little activity and you scale it up by 10%, then you will see that in those numbers. And if it becomes a trigger to try and make you a bit more active, then I think it can be great. It just makes us a bit more cognizant of what we're doing. And for some people, that can really help. But as always, I guess like in all fitness topics, like there is a population of people where actually this goes to the extreme, and this conversation around moving more outside of training actually isn't applicable. Some people actually could do with moving less. I exist in a pocket of the fitness industry where I talk to a lot of people that are training 4 times per week of strength training. They're out doing 2-3 runs per week. They're trying to also get in a Barry's class or a spin class, and they're also hitting over 10,000 steps per day, and they are really struggling. It's really important to recognize that energy in the human body is finite. And if you are always just burning through energy through movement, that's going to tap into the reserves that energy needs to recover from activity. So for some people that have a crazy high volume of or frequency of training sessions, then actually for that population of people, doing a little bit less would actually be quite smart. And also in that context, you probably wouldn't having to eat a little bit more. And I just mentioned that because I do know that some people will hear this advice and feel pressure to move even more, even though they're already moving too much in the first place. So just to finish up, of course, hopefully you knew anyway, but moving is super important. Trying to incorporate it into your day by just picking things that you can do that will accumulate. And when it comes to any kind of activity, try and pick things that you love. It really doesn't matter what you do. As long as you can stick with it all year round, that's the most important thing. As an industry, we need to get better at just encouraging people to get active and not criticize and say you should be doing strength training or you should be doing this form of cardio, because let's face it, that doesn't actually really matter for the majority of people. And I'd love to hear from some of you about what you do. Have you got a creative way yourself that you get activity into your life? I always find it really fascinating to hear personal stories around what people do just to try and get a little bit more active. It can be truly inspiring.